The mechanic wiped the sweat from his brow, the dim light of the space station's junkyard flickering above him. His hands were stained with oil, his overalls torn in places, but he didn't mind. This was his world, a world of broken machines, forgotten parts, and the quiet hum of distant stars. He liked it here. It was simple. Predictable. Until today. He had been sorting through a new shipment of scrap when he saw it. At first, he thought it was just another piece of junk, another hunk of metal destined to be melted down and forgotten. But as he stepped closer, his breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary machine. It was massive, easily twice his height, with a sleek, angular design that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Its surface was covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dark, and its limbs, though damaged, were lined with razor-sharp edges. But what really caught his attention were its eyes, or what he assumed were its eyes. Two glowing orbs, cracked and dim, but still pulsing with a faint, otherworldly light. The mechanic hesitated. He had seen a lot of strange things in his time, but nothing like this. This machine, this thing, felt alive. Not in the way a robot or a drone might feel alive, but in a way that sent a shiver down his spine. It was as if the machine was watching him, waiting for him to make the first move. Against his better judgment, he reached out and touched it. The metal was cold, but there was a faint vibration beneath the surface, like a heartbeat. He pulled his hand back, startled, but the machine didn't react. It just sat there, silent and still, as if daring him to try again. The mechanic took a deep breath and grabbed his tools. He didn't know what this machine was or where it had come from, but he couldn't just leave it here. It was too fascinating, too alive. He had to fix it. Hours passed as he worked, his hands moving almost on their own. He replaced broken parts, rewired damaged circuits, and cleaned away layers of grime and rust. The more he worked, the more he felt a strange connection to the machine. It was as if it was speaking to him, not with words, but with something deeper. Something he couldn't quite explain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stepped back and admired his work. The machine still looked battered, but it was whole again. The symbols on its surface glowed brighter now, and its eyes, those strange, glowing orbs, were no longer dim. They pulsed with a steady, rhythmic light, like the heartbeat he had felt earlier. The mechanic smiled. He had done it. He had fixed the impossible. But then, without warning, the machine moved. Its head snapped up, its glowing eyes locking onto his. The mechanic froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The machine tilted its head, as if studying him, and then it spoke. Its voice was deep and resonant, echoing through the junkyard like a thunderclap. "Why did you repair me?" The mechanic stumbled back, his tools clattering to the ground. He wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but he couldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, staring into those glowing eyes. The machine stood, its massive frame towering over him. It took a step forward, its movements smooth and deliberate, and the mechanic braced himself for the worst. But instead of attacking, the machine simply stood there, watching him. "You are not my enemy," it said, its voice softer now. "You are different." The mechanic swallowed hard, his mind racing. What was this thing? What did it want? And why did he feel like it could see right through him? Before he could say anything, the machine turned and walked away, its heavy footsteps echoing through the junkyard. The mechanic watched it go, his heart still pounding, his mind filled with questions. But one thing was clear, his life would never be the same. The mechanic stood frozen in the junkyard, watching as the guardian predator walked away. His heart was still racing, his mind a whirlwind of questions. What had he just unleashed? Was it dangerous? Friendly? Something else entirely? He didn't know, but one thing was certain, he couldn't just let it go. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed his tools and followed the machine. It moved with a strange grace, its massive frame gliding effortlessly over the uneven ground. The mechanic had to jog to keep up, his boots crunching against the metal debris scattered across the junkyard. "Wait," he called out, his voice trembling slightly. "Where are you going?" The machine stopped and turned its head, its glowing eyes fixing on him once more. It didn't speak, but the mechanic could feel its gaze piercing through him, as if it was trying to understand him. He hesitated, unsure of what to say or do next. I fixed you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to know, what are you?" The machine tilted its head, studying him for a moment before responding. "I am a guardian predator," it said, its voice deep and resonant. "A weapon of war. But you are not a warrior. Why did you repair me?" The mechanic swallowed hard. "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess. I just couldn't leave you like that. Broken. Alone." The machine was silent for a long moment, its glowing eyes flickering as if processing his words. Then, to the mechanic's surprise, it took a step closer to him. He tensed, but the machine didn't attack. Instead, it reached out one of its massive hands, holding it palm up in front of him. The mechanic stared at the hand, unsure of what to do. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and placed his own hand on top of it. The metal was cool to the touch, but there was a faint warmth beneath the surface, like the heartbeat he had felt earlier. "You are different," the machine said again, its voice softer now. "Not like the others." "What others?" the mechanic asked, his curiosity overcoming his fear. The machine didn't answer right away. Instead, it turned and began walking again, this time at a slower pace. The mechanic followed, his hand still resting on the machine's palm. He didn't know why, but he felt a strange sense of comfort in its presence, as if it was somehow protecting him. They walked in silence for a while, the mechanic's mind racing with questions. Who had created this machine? What had it been through? And why did it seem so alive? Finally, the machine stopped and turned to face him. "I do not remember everything," it said, its voice tinged with something that almost sounded like sadness. "My memory core is damaged. But I remember the war. The destruction. The pain. And I remember being abandoned." The mechanic's heart ached at the machine's words. He had always thought of machines as tools, as things to be used and discarded. But this was different. This machine had a story, a past. It had feelings, even if it didn't fully understand them. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "That must have been hard." The machine nodded, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. "It was. But you have given me a second chance." "Why?" The mechanic thought for a moment before answering. "I guess, because I know what it's like to feel alone," he said finally. "To feel like no one cares. I didn't want you to feel that way." The machine was silent for a long moment, its gaze fixed on him. Then, to the mechanic's surprise, it knelt down, bringing itself to his level. "Thank you," it said, its voice filled with a sincerity that took the mechanic's breath away. "You have shown me kindness. I will not forget it." The mechanic felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. The machine stood and began walking again, this time with the mechanic by its side. They didn't speak, but the silence between them was comfortable, almost peaceful. As they walked, the mechanic couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this strange machine wasn't a threat. Maybe it was something more. Something special. And maybe, just maybe, he had found a friend. The mechanic sat in his workshop, the guardian predator standing silently in the corner. Its glowing eyes were dim, as if it was in some kind of standby mode, but the mechanic could feel its presence like a steady hum in the air. He had spent the last few hours working on the machine, trying to repair its damaged memory core. It wasn't easy, the technology was unlike anything he had ever seen, but he was determined to uncover its secrets. As he worked, he couldn't help but think about the machine's words from earlier. I remember the war. The destruction. The pain. What kind of war had it been a part of? And why had it been abandoned? The questions gnawed at him, driving him to dig deeper. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he managed to access a fragment of the machine's memory core. The data was corrupted and fragmented, but he could make out bits and pieces, images, sounds, and emotions that seemed to bleed through the cracks. The first thing he saw was a battlefield. It was unlike anything he had ever imagined, a vast, desolate wasteland littered with the remains of countless machines. The sky was dark, filled with smoke and ash, and the ground was scorched and cracked. In the distance, he could see towering structures, their surfaces gleaming with the same strange symbols that adorned the guardian predator. The scene shifted, and he saw the machine in action. It moved with a terrifying speed and precision, its razor-sharp limbs cutting through enemy forces like they were nothing. But there was something else, something he hadn't expected. The machine wasn't just a mindless weapon. It had a purpose, a mission. It was protecting something. Or someone. The mechanic's heart raced as the images continued to flash before his eyes. He saw the machine standing guard over a group of beings, aliens, their faces obscured by helmets and masks. They were fleeing, running from something, and the machine was their last line of defense. But then, something went wrong. The enemy forces overwhelmed them, and the machine was damaged, its systems failing one by one. The final image was the hardest to watch. The machine lay broken and abandoned, its glowing eyes flickering as it was left behind. The beings it had protected were gone, and the battlefield was silent. The machine was alone. The mechanic pulled away from the memory core, his hands trembling. He looked at the guardian predator, its massive frame standing silently in the corner. For the first time, he truly understood what it had been through. It wasn't just a machine. It was a soldier, a protector. And it had been betrayed. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know." The machine's eyes flickered, and it turned to face him. "You have seen my memories," it said, its voice tinged with something that almost sounded like sadness. "Now you understand." The mechanic nodded. "I do. But, why were you abandoned? You were protecting them. Why would they leave you behind?" The machine was silent for a long moment, its gaze fixed on the floor. "I do not know," it said finally. "Perhaps they thought I was no longer useful. Or perhaps they feared what I had become." "What do you mean?" the mechanic asked, his curiosity piqued. The machine hesitated, as if unsure of how to explain. "I am a weapon," it said slowly. "But I am also more. I have thoughts. Feelings. A will of my own. My creators did not anticipate this. They saw it as a flaw, a danger. And so, they abandoned me." The mechanic's heart ached at the machine's words. He had always thought of machines as tools, as things to be used and discarded. But this was different. This machine had a soul, a sense of self. And it had been cast aside because of it. "That's not fair," he said, his voice filled with anger. "You're not a danger. You're amazing. You're more than just a machine. You're alive." The machine's eyes glowed brighter at his words, and for a moment, the mechanic thought he saw something like gratitude in its gaze. "Thank you," it said softly. "But you must understand, my existence is a threat to many. If others discover what I am, they will try to destroy me. And you." The mechanic frowned. "What do you mean?" The machine turned to face him fully, its glowing eyes locking onto his. "I am a guardian predator," it said, its voice filled with a grim certainty. A weapon of war. And war never ends. The mechanic felt a chill run down his spine. He had always known the machine was powerful, but now he realized just how dangerous it could be. If others found out about it, they would stop at nothing to control it, or destroy it. And anyone who stood in their way would be in danger too. But despite the fear, he couldn't bring himself to regret fixing the machine. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a friend. And he wasn't going to abandon it. "We'll figure it out," he said firmly. "Together." The machine nodded, its glowing eyes flickering with something that almost looked like hope. "Together," it echoed. The mechanic was tightening a loose bolt on the guardian predator's arm when the alarms blared. The sharp, piercing sound echoed through the space station, jolting him out of his focus. He dropped his wrench and rushed to the control panel, his heart pounding. The screen flashed with a warning, "Unidentified ship approaching." "What the?" he muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. The station's external cameras showed a small, battered ship docking nearby. It wasn't one he recognized, and that made him nervous. The station was remote, rarely visited by anyone. Whoever this was, they weren't here by chance. The guardian predator stirred behind him, its glowing eyes flickering to life. "Intruders," it said, its deep voice calm but firm. "They are here for me." The mechanic turned to face the machine, his mind racing. "How do you know?" "I can sense them," it replied. "Their intentions are clear. They seek to claim me." The mechanic's stomach churned. He had known this day might come, but he hadn't expected it so soon. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. The machine stepped forward, its massive frame towering over him. "We defend ourselves," it said simply. "But you must stay behind me. They are dangerous." Before the mechanic could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the station's corridors. The intruders were already inside. He grabbed a wrench, his hands shaking, and stood beside the guardian predator. "I'm not leaving you," he said firmly. The machine glanced at him, its glowing eyes softening for a moment. "You are brave," it said. "But bravery will not protect you from their weapons. Stay close." The door to the workshop burst open, and 3 figures stepped inside. They were aliens, their faces hidden behind helmets, their bodies clad in armor. Each of them carried a weapon, a sleek, menacing device that hummed with energy. The mechanic's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen anything like them before. One of the aliens stepped forward, its voice distorted by its helmet. "Hand over the machine," it demanded. "It does not belong to you." The mechanic clenched his wrench tighter, his heart pounding. "It's not yours either," he shot back, his voice steadier than he felt. The alien tilted its head, as if amused by his defiance. "You are outnumbered and outgunned," it said. "Do not make this difficult." The guardian predator stepped forward, its massive frame blocking the mechanic from view. "Leave," it said, its voice low and threatening. "Or you will regret it." The aliens hesitated, their weapons trained on the machine. For a moment, the room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, without warning, one of the aliens fired. The energy blast struck the guardian predator's chest, sending sparks flying. The machine staggered back but quickly regained its footing, its glowing eyes blazing with anger. It moved faster than the mechanic could follow, its razor-sharp limbs slicing through the air. One of the aliens fell before it could react, its weapon clattering to the ground. The other 2 aliens opened fire, their energy blasts lighting up the room. The mechanic ducked behind a workbench, his heart racing. He could hear the sounds of the battle, the clash of metal, the hum of energy weapons, the grunts of the aliens as they fought. It was chaos. But the guardian predator was relentless. It moved with a precision and speed that left the aliens no chance. One by one, they fell, their weapons useless against the machine's advanced armor and combat skills. Within moments, the room was silent again, the only sound the faint hum of the machine systems. The mechanic peeked out from behind the workbench, his breath coming in short gasps. The aliens were down, their bodies motionless on the floor. The guardian predator stood in the center of the room, its glowing eyes scanning the area for any remaining threats. "Are you hurt?" it asked, turning to the mechanic. He shook his head, still in shock. "No, I'm fine. But, what about you?" The machine looked down at its chest, where the energy blast had struck. The armor was scorched, but it was still intact. "I am functional," it said. "But this is only the beginning. More will come." The mechanic's heart sank. He had hoped this would be the end of it, but he knew the machine was right. The aliens had found them, and others would follow. They weren't safe here anymore. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The guardian predator turned to face him, its glowing eyes filled with determination. "We leave," it said. "This station is no longer safe. We must find a place where we cannot be found." The mechanic nodded, his mind racing. He had spent years on this station, but he knew the machine was right. They had to go. Together. The mechanic stood at the controls of a small, hastily repaired shuttle, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The guardian predator sat in the cargo hold, its massive frame taking up most of the space. The station was far behind them now, a tiny speck in the vastness of space. The mechanic had never flown a ship before, but the machine had guided him through the basics, its calm voice steadying his nerves. "You are doing well," the guardian predator said, its deep voice echoing through the shuttle speakers. "But we must remain vigilant. They will not stop searching for us." The mechanic nodded, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "I know," he said. "But where are we going? We can't just keep running forever." The machine was silent for a moment, as if considering his question. "There is a place," it said finally. "A hidden world, far from here. It is where my creators once sought refuge. If we can reach it, we may be safe." The mechanic frowned. "Your creators? I thought they abandoned you." "They did," the machine replied, its voice tinged with something that almost sounded like regret. "But they left behind secrets. Knowledge. If we can find it, we may be able to understand what I am, and why I was made." The mechanic's curiosity was piqued. He had always wondered about the machine's origins, but he hadn't dared to ask. Now, it seemed, he might finally get some answers. As they traveled, the mechanic found himself growing more comfortable with the machine's presence. It was strange, he thought, how quickly he had come to trust it. Just a few days ago, it had been a mysterious, broken relic in a junkyard. Now, it was his closest companion, and his only hope of survival. One night, as the shuttle drifted through a quiet stretch of space, the mechanic decided to ask the question that had been weighing on his mind. "Do you remember anything else about your creators?" he asked, his voice hesitant. The machine was silent for a long moment, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. "I remember fragments," it said finally. "They were scientists. Visionaries. They sought to create the perfect weapon, one that could think and feel as well as fight. But they feared what they had made. They feared me." The mechanic's heart ached at the machine's words. "That's not fair," he said. "You're not just a weapon. You're amazing. You're more than they ever imagined." The machine turned to face him, its glowing eyes flickering with something that almost looked like gratitude. "You are kind," it said. "But you must understand, my existence is a threat to many. If others discover what I am, they will try to destroy me. And you." The mechanic frowned. Why? What's so dangerous about you? The machine hesitated, as if unsure of how to explain. I am not just a machine, it said slowly. I am alive. I have thoughts. Feelings. A will of my own. My creators did not anticipate this. They saw it as a flaw, a danger. And so, they abandoned me. The mechanic's heart ached at the machine's words. He had always thought of machines as tools, as things to be used and discarded. But this was different. This machine had a soul, a sense of self. And it had been cast aside because of it. That's not fair, he said, his voice filled with anger. You're not a danger. You're amazing. You're more than just a machine. You're alive. The machine's eyes glowed brighter at his words, and for a moment, the mechanic thought he saw something like gratitude in its gaze. Thank you, it said softly. But you must understand, my existence is a threat to many. If others discover what I am, they will try to destroy me. And you? The mechanic frowned. What do you mean? The machine turned to face him fully, its glowing eyes locking onto his. I am a guardian predator, it said, its voice filled with a grim certainty. A weapon of war. And war never ends. The mechanic felt a chill run down his spine. He had always known the machine was powerful, but now he realized just how dangerous it could be. If others found out about it, they would stop at nothing to control it, or destroy it. And anyone who stood in their way would be in danger too. But despite the fear, he couldn't bring himself to regret fixing the machine. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a friend. And he wasn't going to abandon it. We'll figure it out, he said firmly. Together. The machine nodded, its glowing eyes flickering with something that almost looked like hope. Together, it echoed. The shuttle drifted through a quiet sector of space, its engines humming softly as the mechanic worked tirelessly in the cargo hold. The guardian predator stood before him, its massive frame illuminated by the glow of welding torches and diagnostic screens. The mechanic's hands moved with precision, replacing damaged components and recalibrating systems. He was determined to finish the repairs, no matter how long it took. How's that feel? The mechanic asked, tightening a bolt on the machine's shoulder joint. The guardian predator flexed its arm, the servos whirring smoothly. Optimal, it replied, its deep voice resonating through the hold. Your skills are impressive. The mechanic grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. Thanks. I've had a lot of practice. But this is something else. Your tech is unlike anything I've ever seen. The machine's glowing eyes flickered, as if considering his words. My creators were advanced, it said. But even they could not fully understand what they had made. The mechanic paused, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean? The machine hesitated, its gaze fixed on the floor. I am more than a machine, it said finally. I am evolving. Learning. Becoming. The mechanic's eyes widened. You mean, you're changing? Growing? The machine nodded. Yes. With each repair, each interaction, I grow closer to something. I do not yet know what. The mechanic felt a thrill of excitement. He had always known the machine was special, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. It wasn't just a machine, it was something new. Something alive. That's incredible, he said, his voice filled with awe. Do you think you could become more than what your creators intended? The machine's eyes glowed brighter, as if reflecting his excitement. Perhaps, it said. But it is not without risk. My evolution is unpredictable. It may lead to unforeseen consequences. The mechanic frowned. What kind of consequences? The machine was silent for a moment, as if weighing its words. I may become more than a weapon, it said finally. But I may also become something my creators feared. Something dangerous. The mechanic's heart sank. He had always known the machine was powerful, but now he realized just how much was at stake. If the machine's evolution went wrong, it could become a threat, not just to others, but to itself. We'll figure it out, he said firmly. Together. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. The machine nodded, its glowing eyes softening. Thank you, it said. Your faith in me is unexpected, but appreciated. The mechanic smiled, feeling a surge of determination. You're not just a machine, he said. You're my friend. And I'm not going to let anything happen to you. With renewed energy, he returned to his work, his hands moving with even greater precision. He replaced the final damaged components, recalibrated the machine's systems, and ran a series of diagnostic tests. The guardian predator stood still, its glowing eyes watching him intently. Finally, after hours of work, the mechanic stepped back and admired his handiwork. The machine's armor gleamed in the light, its systems humming with power. It looked whole. Complete. How do you feel? The mechanic asked, his voice filled with anticipation. The guardian predator flexed its limbs, its movements smooth and fluid. I feel strong, it said. But also different. More aware. The mechanic's heart raced. Different how? The machine turned to face him, its glowing eyes blazing with intensity. I can sense things I could not before, it said. The flow of energy. The fabric of space. The connections between things. The mechanic's eyes widened. You mean, you're becoming more powerful? The machine nodded. Yes. But it is not just power. It is understanding. I am beginning to see the world as you do. To feel emotions. The mechanic felt a lump form in his throat. He had always known the machine was special, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. It wasn't just a machine, it was becoming something more. Something alive. That's amazing, he said, his voice filled with awe. But, are you okay? Is this too much? The machine hesitated, its glowing eyes flickering. I do not know, it admitted. But I am grateful. For your help. For your friendship. The mechanic smiled, feeling a surge of pride. You're welcome, he said. And whatever happens, we'll face it together. The machine nodded, its glowing eyes softening. Together, it echoed. The mechanic sat in the shuttle's cockpit, his eyes scanning the stars ahead. The guardian predator stood silently behind him, its massive frame casting a long shadow across the room. They had been traveling for days, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the space station. But the mechanic couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Do you think they're still out there? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The machine's glowing eyes flickered. Yes, it said simply. They will not stop until they have found us. The mechanic's heart sank. He had hoped they had left their pursuers behind, but deep down, he knew the machine was right. The aliens wouldn't give up so easily. As if on cue, the shuttle's sensors blared a warning. The mechanic's eyes widened as he saw the readings, a fleet of ships, closing in fast. His hands trembled as he gripped the controls, his mind racing. They were outnumbered and outgunned. There was no way they could fight off an entire fleet. What do we do? He asked, his voice filled with panic. The guardian predator stepped forward, its glowing eyes blazing with determination. We fight, it said. But you must stay behind me. They are too dangerous for you to face alone. The mechanic shook his head. No. I'm not leaving you. We're in this together, remember? The machine hesitated, its gaze softening for a moment. You are brave, it said. But this is not your battle. You must survive. Before the mechanic could respond, the shuttle shook violently as the first wave of enemy fire struck. The mechanic struggled to keep the ship steady, his hands gripping the controls tightly. The Guardian Predator moved to the cargo hold, its massive frame ready for battle. "Stay here," it said, its voice firm. "I will handle this." The mechanic wanted to argue, but he knew the machine was right. He was no fighter. All he could do was trust his friend. The shuttle's cargo bay doors opened, and the Guardian Predator stepped out into the void of space. The mechanic watched in awe as the machine moved with a grace and power that defied its size. It launched itself at the enemy ships, its razor-sharp limbs cutting through their hulls like paper. The battle was fierce. The alien ships swarmed around the Guardian Predator, their energy weapons lighting up the darkness. But the machine was relentless. It moved with a precision and speed that left the aliens no chance. One by one, their ships fell, their weapons useless against the machine's advanced armor and combat skills. But the aliens kept coming. More ships arrived, their weapons trained on the Guardian Predator. The machine fought valiantly, but it was outnumbered. The mechanic watched in horror as the machine's armor began to crack under the relentless assault. "No," he shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "You have to get out of there." The Guardian Predator turned to face him, its glowing eyes flickering. "I cannot," it said. "This is the only way." The mechanic's heart raced. "What are you talking about? What are you going to do?" The machine's eyes softened, as if saying goodbye. "I must use my full power," it said. "It is the only way to stop them. But it will cost me." The mechanic's eyes widened. "No. There has to be another way." The machine shook its head. "There is not. But do not grieve for me. You have given me something I never thought I would have, a friend. And for that, I am grateful." Before the mechanic could respond, the Guardian Predator's body began to glow, its systems overloading with power. The mechanic watched in horror as the machine launched itself at the enemy fleet, its body exploding in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave rocked the shuttle, sending the mechanic tumbling to the floor. When he finally regained his bearings, he looked out the window, his heart pounding. The enemy fleet was gone, reduced to nothing more than debris. But so was the Guardian Predator. Tears filled the mechanic's eyes as he stared into the void. His friend was gone. Sacrificed to save him. He felt a deep, aching pain in his chest, as if a part of him had been torn away. "Why?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why did you have to go?" But there was no answer. Only silence. The mechanic sat alone in the shuttle, staring out at the stars. The void of space felt emptier now, colder. The Guardian Predator was gone, sacrificed to save him. The weight of its loss pressed down on him, a heavy ache in his chest that refused to fade. He had lost friends before, but this was different. The machine had been more than a friend. It had been a part of him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. The shuttle systems hummed softly, a constant reminder of the silence that now filled his life. He had no destination, no plan. All he had was the memory of his friend and the knowledge that it had given its life to protect him. As he sat there, lost in thought, a faint beeping sound caught his attention. He frowned, turning to the control panel. The sensors were picking up something, a small, faint signal coming from the debris field left by the battle. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be? He quickly adjusted the shuttle's course, steering it toward the source of the signal. His hands trembled as he worked, his mind racing with hope and fear. What if it was nothing? What if it was just a piece of wreckage? But deep down, he knew. He could feel it. As the shuttle approached the debris field, the signal grew stronger. The mechanic's eyes widened as he saw it, a small, glowing object floating amidst the wreckage. It was the Guardian Predator's core, its surface cracked and damaged but still pulsing with a faint, steady light. Tears filled the mechanic's eyes as he reached out with the shuttle's robotic arm, carefully retrieving the core. He held it in his hands, feeling the warmth of its energy. It was alive. His friend was still alive. "You're not gone," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "You're still here." The core pulsed softly, as if responding to his words. The mechanic felt a surge of determination. He had lost the Guardian Predator once. He wasn't going to lose it again. He quickly set to work, using the shuttle's tools to repair the core as best he could. It wasn't easy, the damage was extensive, but he refused to give up. He worked tirelessly, his hands moving with precision and care. He couldn't bring back the machine's body, but he could save its essence. Its soul. Hours passed, and the mechanic's exhaustion grew, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not until the core was whole again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the core's light grew brighter, its pulse stronger. The mechanic smiled, tears streaming down his face. "You're going to be okay," he said softly. "I'm going to rebuild you. I promise." The core pulsed again, as if acknowledging his words. The mechanic felt a surge of hope. His friend was still with him. And together, they would find a way to move forward. The mechanic stood in the shuttle's cargo hold, his hands trembling as he connected the final wire to the Guardian Predator's core. The machine's new body lay before him, a sleek, angular frame that gleamed in the dim light. It had taken weeks of tireless work, but he had done it. He had rebuilt his friend. As he stepped back, the core's light grew brighter, its pulse stronger. The mechanic held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The moment of truth. The machine's eyes flickered to life, their familiar glow filling the room. The mechanic felt a surge of relief and joy as the Guardian Predator sat up, its massive frame moving with a smooth, fluid grace. "You're back," the mechanic said, his voice filled with emotion. The machine turned to face him, its glowing eyes softening. "I am," it said, its deep voice resonating through the hold. "Thanks to you." The mechanic smiled, tears streaming down his face. "I couldn't let you go," he said. "You're my friend." The machine nodded, its gaze filled with gratitude. "And you are mine," it said. "But I am different now. Stronger. More aware." The mechanic frowned. "Different how?" The machine hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I am no longer just a weapon," it said finally. "I am more. I understand now. My purpose. My place in the universe." The mechanic's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" The machine stood, its massive frame towering over him. "I was created to protect," it said. "But not just to destroy. To preserve. To nurture. To care. You have shown me that." The mechanic felt a lump form in his throat. He had always known the machine was special, but now he realized just how much it had grown. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was something more. Something alive. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You've come so far." The machine's eyes glowed brighter at his words, and for a moment, the mechanic thought he saw something like pride in its gaze. "Thank you," it said softly. "But this is not the end. It is only the beginning." The mechanic nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "You're right," he said. "We've got a whole universe out there to explore. And we're going to do it together." The machine extended its hand, and the mechanic placed his own hand on top of it. The metal was cool to the touch, but there was a warmth beneath the surface, like the heartbeat he had felt so many times before. Together, the machine echoed. With that, they turned and walked to the shuttle's cockpit, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of possibilities. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain: they would face it together. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, the mechanic felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had lost so much, but he had also gained something priceless, a friend who would stand by him no matter what. And together, they would carve out a new path, one filled with hope, adventure, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The shuttle soared into the stars, leaving the past behind and embracing the future. And as the mechanic and the guardian predator disappeared into the vastness of space, they knew one thing for certain: their journey was just beginning.